The wind howled through the trees, a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the fabric thin against the biting cold. It was just another evening in the woods, yet something about this night felt different, an unsettling energy crackling in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I paused, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see shadows dancing in the darkness. I had chosen this life, living off the grid, away from the chaos of society. The solitude had been a balm for my soul, allowing me to reconnect with nature in a way that felt rejuvenating. But as the branches creaked ominously above me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, a presence lurking just beyond, the edge of my vision. My cabin stood a few hundred yards away, a modest wooden structure nestled between towering pines. It had become my sanctuary, a place where the outside world faded away. I spent my days fishing in the nearby lake and my evenings collecting firewood, reveling in the peaceful rhythm of life alone. Yet, tonight, that peace felt fragile, like a thin veil stretched too taut. As I approached the cabin, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. I fumbled with the keys, the metal cold against my fingers. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke, enveloping me like a comforting embrace. I lit the lantern, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The cabin felt alive, each creak and groan echoing my own unease. I settled into my chair by the fire, the flames crackling and popping, a reminder of the warmth I found within these walls. But even as I stared into the flickering light, my thoughts drifted back to the outside world of bustling streets, laughter, and the hum of human connection. I had chosen isolation, but now a gnawing loneliness crept in, wrapping around my heart like a vice. The storm hit the next morning, dark clouds rolling in like an army marching toward battle. The sky crackled with electricity, and I felt an instinctive urge to prepare. I stowed away supplies, ensuring I wouldn't be caught off guard. Yet as the first drops of rain began to fall, a sense of foreboding settled in my chest. It wasn't just the storm that worried me. It was the feeling of being utterly alone. The wind howled, and the rain lashed against the cabin like 1,000 tiny fists. I sat by the fire, listening to the chaos outside, nature unleashing its fury. The world outside transformed into a swirling tempest, a cacophony of sound and fury that drowned out my thoughts. I could almost hear the forest screaming, and I wondered how long it would last. Days passed, the storm relentless. I lost track of time, the sun swallowed by dark clouds. Each day bled into the next, the world outside my window a hazy blur of rain and wind. I rationed my supplies, but the isolation grew heavy, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I missed the simplicity of human interaction, the comfort of shared laughter and conversation. I ventured out only when absolutely necessary, braving the storm to gather firewood or check on my traps. Each time I stepped outside, the wildness of the world felt suffocating, the trees towering like sentinels, watching my every move. I could feel their judgment in the air, an unspoken question hanging between us. Why had I chosen this? On the fourth day, as I filled my small woodpile, I heard a faint noise, a whisper beneath the roar of the storm. I paused, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. It was a sound I couldn't quite place, a soft rustling that seemed to come from deeper in the woods. My heart raced, and I glanced toward the tree line, straining to hear over the din. Was someone out there? The thought sent chills down my spine. I had become so accustomed to solitude that the idea of another person nearby was both thrilling and terrifying. I shook my head, dismissing it as the wind playing tricks on my mind. Yet, the feeling of being watched persisted, a shadow lurking just out of reach. That night, as I huddled by the fire, the storm reached its peak. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the rain pounded against the cabin with a ferocity that felt almost alive. I tried to focus on the flames, but my mind wandered back to the noise I had heard. What if someone was out there, lost in the storm? My instincts battled with my fears. Should I venture out to help, or was it safer to remain inside? The decision was taken from me when I heard it again, a cry that pierced through the storm, raw and desperate. My heart raced as I leaped to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Was it a person? A wild animal? The world outside felt like a different realm, filled with unknown dangers. I grabbed my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness as I flung open the door. The storm lashed against me, cold and biting, but I pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and concern. The trees loomed around me, their branches swaying violently, and I felt the weight of the forest pressing in, demanding my attention. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the wind. The cry had come from somewhere nearby, a haunting echo that sent shivers down my spine. I squinted into the darkness, searching for any sign of life. The sound came again, muffled by the storm, but unmistakable. Someone was out there. I pushed through the underbrush, my heart pounding as I followed the sound. The world felt distorted, the storm swirling around me, drowning out my thoughts. I stumbled through the trees, my flashlight flickering, casting eerie shadows that made the forest seem alive with unseen eyes. As I moved deeper into the woods, the cries grew louder, more frantic. Panic surged through me, but I pressed on, driven by a need to help. Suddenly, the beam of my flashlight caught something, an outline against the trees. It was a figure, hunched over and shivering, drenched from the storm. "Are you okay?" I shouted, rushing toward them. But as I got closer, a wave of dread washed over me. The figure turned, and I froze, the flashlight illuminating their face. They were pale, eyes wide with terror, and a smile that sent chills down my spine, a grin that felt wrong, twisted. "Help me!" they whispered, their voice barely audible over the storm. But there was something in their gaze, something that made my stomach churn. Before I could react, the figure lunged forward and I stumbled back, heart racing. "What do you want?" I shouted, fear clawing at my throat. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they reached out, fingers brushing my arm, and I felt a jolt of cold seep into my skin. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, the storm howling around me. The laughter of the figure echoed in my mind, a haunting sound that filled the space where my courage once resided. I raced back to the cabin, my heart pounding, the darkness closing in around me. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, panting as I leaned against it. The storm raged on, but I felt a new kind of terror settle in my chest. Whatever I had encountered had been more than just a person. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist in the world I knew. As the wind howled outside, I realized that my sanctuary had become a prison. I had sought peace in solitude, but now the weight of isolation pressed down on me, suffocating and overwhelming. I missed the connection of humanity, the safety of knowing there were others out there. The storm continued to rage, but I was no longer afraid of the elements. My fear had shifted, turning inward. What had I invited into my life? In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't remain here, cut off from the world any longer. I had to return to civilization, to the warmth of community, and the safety of those who understood. The storm would eventually pass, and when it did, I would leave this place behind. But as I settled into the chair by the fire, the shadows danced around me, taunting. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone, that I had brought something back with me, the specter of loneliness that had whispered to me through the storm, reminding me of the true cost of solitude. The storm had raged for days, but it was the silence that followed that felt most unsettling. As the winds died down and the rain turned to a gentle drizzle, I sat in my cabin, absorbing the aftermath of the tempest. Nature had a way of reclaiming its territory, and as I stared out at the drenched forest, I couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and dread. I had lived alone for years, embracing the isolation that came with my choice to live off the grid, Yet, now the solitude felt like a double-edged sword, cutting deeper with every passing moment. I thought of the figure I had encountered in the storm, a haunting presence that lingered in my mind, and how their frozen smile echoed the contradictions within myself. In the quiet that followed the storm, I began to reflect on the relationships I had left behind, friends, family, and the connections that once defined my life. Each memory was tinged with nostalgia and regret. I remembered Emma, my closest friend, before I retreated into the wilderness. She had always been the light to my shadow, the voice of reason when my thoughts spiraled into darkness. Emma was fiercely independent but craved connection, often filling her life with people to counterbalance her fears of loneliness. "You can't escape the world forever, Jake," she'd said, her brow furrowed in concern. "You need people around you." I had laughed it off then, convinced I could find peace in isolation. Now I found myself questioning that decision. The forest outside my window was alive with the sounds of nature returning to normalcy. Birds chirped tentatively, as if testing the waters of a new day, while the leaves glistened with rain, vibrant and full of life. Yet I felt disconnected from it all, as if I were an observer rather than a participant in this beautiful, chaotic world. As I prepared myself for the journey back to civilization, I thought of the contradictions within me. I had longed for solitude, yet here I was, yearning for the warmth of human connection. I had embraced the wildness of the forest, and yet I was terrified of what that wilderness had revealed to me. It was a strange duality, one that left me feeling fragmented. The figure in the storm haunted my thoughts. Had they been real, or just a manifestation of my fears? I recalled their eyes, wide with something that felt like desperation and madness, intertwined. They had reached out, not in anger, but in need. It reminded me of the darkness I had tried to escape, the loneliness that could consume a person if left unchecked. To confront the world again meant confronting those feelings head-on. I needed to understand what it meant to be human, to connect with others despite the risk of pain. As I gathered my belongings, I felt a wave of determination wash over me. I was ready to face whatever awaited me beyond the trees. Leaving the cabin was like shedding a second skin. The forest, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage as I stepped away from the familiar. Each step took me closer to the road, to the world I had abandoned. Memories of laughter and warmth filled my mind, juxtaposed with shadows of regret and loss. As I navigated the familiar trails, I recalled the locals who had once been part of my life. There was Tom, the old fisherman who had taught me everything I knew about surviving in the wilderness. He had a rugged charm, his hands weathered and calloused from years of labor. He was a man of few words, but his wisdom ran deep. "Life is about balance, Jake," he'd often say, his gaze piercing. "You can't have the good without the bad." Tom had lost his family in a tragic accident years ago, and in his eyes I saw a reflection of my own fears. The desire to disconnect, to retreat into the wild, was often rooted in pain. He had built a life around solitude, yet I could sense his longing for companionship when he spoke of the past. It was a reminder that even the strongest among us could crumble under the weight of loneliness. The road ahead was muddy and slick from the storm, each step a reminder of the journey I had taken. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, mirroring the turmoil within. With every mile I walked, memories of the connection I had willingly severed flooded back. The laughter, the shared meals, the comfort of knowing someone was there to share life's burdens, it all felt distant now. As I reached the edge of the forest, the landscape opened up, revealing the small town I had once called home. It was a place filled with familiar faces, each one a thread in the tapestry of my life. But as I stepped into that world again, I was acutely aware of how much I had changed. Would they see the differences? Would they understand my journey? The first person I encountered was a woman named Clara, who owned the local grocery store. She had a penchant for gossip and a heart of gold. "Jake," she exclaimed, her eyes widening in surprise. "We thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth." Her warmth was comforting, but I noticed the way her gaze flickered with curiosity, as if she were probing for answers. "I've been away," I replied, my voice steady, but my heart racing. "Just needed some time to think." Clara nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was kind but skeptical, her life intertwined with the community in a way that I had distanced myself from. "You should come to the potluck this weekend. Everyone's been worried about you," she urged, her smile genuine but tinged with concern. The thought of gathering with familiar faces filled me with a mix of excitement and anxiety. I hadn't realized how much I missed these interactions until now, yet a part of me hesitated. What if they could see the cracks in my facade? What if they could sense the shadows lurking within? As I walked through the town, I felt like a ghost, haunting my own past. The streets were alive with chatter, children playing, neighbors exchanging pleasantries. Yet I felt like an outsider peering in, grappling with the weight of my solitude. The contrast was stark. The vibrant community I had left behind now felt like a world apart, filled with laughter and connection I had chosen to forego. In the distance, I spotted Tom, casting his line into the same river where we had spent countless hours fishing. I hesitated before approaching, unsure of how to reconnect. He turned, his expression shifting from surprise to something warmer. "Jake," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "You're back." "Yeah, for now," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed to clear my head." Tom studied me for a moment, his gaze penetrating. "You find what you were looking for?" I shrugged, the answer lingering on my lips. "I think I found something," I said carefully, choosing my words. "Maybe just a reminder of what I left behind." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he understood the unspoken weight of my journey. "Sometimes we run from what we need most," he replied, a hint of wisdom in his voice. "But remember, Jake, it's never too late to reconnect." Those words lingered with me as I returned home, the familiar surroundings stirring a mix of comfort and anxiety within. I was back in the world I had abandoned, but I was also a different person, shaped by the solitude, the storms, and the haunting figure I had encountered. The potluck loomed ahead, a chance to reconnect and face the community I had distanced myself from. It was a daunting prospect, yet a necessary one. I couldn't hide from the past any longer. I had to confront the shadows, to embrace the connections I once cherished. As I prepared for the gathering, I felt a sense of resolve settle in my chest. I would face whatever awaited me, questions, doubts, and perhaps even the warmth of acceptance. The journey back to civilization had begun, and with it, a new chapter in my life was unfolding. Returning to civilization was supposed to be a relief, a chance to reconnect with the life I had left behind. Yet, as I prepared for the potluck, I felt a storm brewing inside me, one that had little to do with the weather. The warmth of the town, the laughter and chatter, felt like a distant echo of my solitude. I was acutely aware of the choices that lay before me, each one a moral dilemma fraught with consequence. Arriving at the community center, I hesitated at the door, the sounds of joy spilling out into the chilly evening air. It felt surreal to be back among people after so long. I could feel the weight of their gazes as I entered, a mixture of concern and curiosity. They had seen me disappear into the woods, and now I was back, a ghost of my former self. Clara spotted me first, her eyes lighting up with a welcoming smile. "Jake, you made it!" she exclaimed, enveloping me in a warm hug. The scent of her homemade chili wafted around us, a familiar comfort, but as I returned her embrace, I sensed the undercurrents of scrutiny from the others. "Everyone's been worried," she continued, leading me into the room filled with familiar faces. "You should catch up with Tom. He's been saying how he misses your fishing trips." "Yeah, I'll do that," I replied, forcing a smile, though the thought of facing Tom filled me with trepidation. Would he see the change in me, the cracks in my facade? As I moved deeper into the room, I noticed a group gathered in the corner, their laughter loud and infectious. It was a mix of old friends and new faces, but one person caught my attention. Emma. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt a jolt of emotion. I had missed her warmth, her laughter, but I also remembered the way she had urged me to stay connected. I hesitated again, torn between approaching her and retreating. My heart raced as I recalled our last conversation, her words echoing in my mind, "You can't escape the world forever." I took a deep breath, deciding that I owed it to her and to myself to face this. "Hey, Emma," I said, joining the group. Her smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of concern passing through her eyes. "Jake, it's so good to see you," she said, her voice warm but laced with an undercurrent of worry. "We thought you'd disappeared for good." I needed some time to think, I admitted, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. "But I've realized that maybe I was running from more than just the world." She studied me, her expression serious. "What do you mean?" "Just that. I was hiding from my own feelings. The storm hit hard, and it forced me to confront things I didn't want to face." Before she could respond, Clara interrupted, calling everyone to gather around for dinner. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the focus shifted, but the conversation left an ache in my chest. I was back. But the question remained, could I ever truly reconnect? As we shared stories over bowls of chili, I felt the tension begin to ease. Laughter filled the air, and I found myself slipping back into the rhythm of community life. Yet, beneath the surface, I sensed an undercurrent of unease. The figure in the storm haunted my thoughts, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the edges of this warmth. Later in the evening, as people mingled and shared their lives, I caught sight of Tom, his eyes scanning the room. I approached him, feeling a mix of anxiety and nostalgia. "Hey, Tom," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a while." "Jake," he replied, his expression unreadable. "You look different. I've been through some things," I admitted, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between us. "But I'm back now. I'm ready to reconnect." He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. "You know, the woods can change a person," he said, his voice low. "Sometimes, when you're out there alone, you face parts of yourself that you didn't know existed." "I faced something I can't explain," I replied, my heart racing. It was like I was confronted by my own fears. Tom studied me, his brow furrowing. "Fear can be a powerful teacher, but it's also deceptive. Be careful what you let in." His words resonated, and I felt a chill run down my spine. What had I brought back with me? The thought lingered as I rejoined the others, trying to shake the sense of foreboding that clung to me. The night wore on, and as the laughter and chatter intensified, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. I turned to see a group of people gathered, their faces a mix of shock and concern. My heart raced as I pushed through the crowd, anxious to see what had happened. At the center stood a young woman, her face pale and trembling. "I swear I saw someone in the woods," she cried, her voice shaking. It was like they were watching me." A murmur spread through the crowd, a ripple of fear that echoed my own unease. "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her voice steady but edged with worry. "I was walking home, and I felt like someone was following me," the woman explained, her eyes darting around. "I turned, and there was a figure just standing there in the shadows. I ran as fast as I could." The tension in the room thickened, and I felt the familiar weight of dread settle on my shoulders. Had my experience in the storm awakened something? Had I unwittingly drawn a darkness back into our lives? The figure I had encountered, the way they had reached out to me, was it all connected? As the discussion escalated, I could see the fear in the eyes of those around me. They had welcomed me back, but now uncertainty loomed over us. I felt the urgency to act, to face whatever threat lingered in the woods. "I'll go check it out," I said, my voice firm despite the uncertainty churning within me. "You can't go out there alone," Clara protested, her face a mask of concern. "I have to," I insisted, the fear of the unknown pushing me forward. If something is out there, I can't let it affect this community. I need to face it. Tom stepped forward, his expression grave. I'll go with you. It's not safe out there, especially not now. Relief washed over me, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on my mind. As we prepared to leave, I caught Emma's gaze across the room. She looked worried, but there was an understanding in her eyes. I was about to face my fears head-on, and I couldn't turn back now. The cold air hit me like a slap as we stepped outside, the night heavy with tension. Tom and I moved toward the edge of the forest, the shadows stretching ominously around us. The sounds of the town faded, swallowed by the darkness as we ventured deeper into the woods. "Stay close," Tom warned, his voice low and steady. "We don't know what we're dealing with." With every step, the memories of my time alone in the wilderness flooded back, both the peace and the terror. I felt the weight of my decisions, the choices that had led me to this moment. Would I find answers, or would I only uncover more questions? As we approached the clearing where I had seen the figure, my heart raced. The air felt charged with energy, a palpable tension that made each breath feel heavy. We stopped, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "It was right here," I said, pointing to the spot where I had encountered the figure. "I felt it watching me." Tom nodded, his gaze steady. "Let's stay alert." Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes caught my attention, and I turned sharply, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart racing. Before Tom could respond, the figure emerged, stepping into the moonlight. It was the same woman from earlier, her eyes wide with fear. "You have to help me!" she cried, her voice trembling. "It's back! It won't leave me alone!" Panic surged through me as I glanced at Tom. "What do you mean it won't leave?" "You alone?" "I see it everywhere," she gasped, her breath coming in quick bursts. "In my dreams, in the shadows. It knows me. I can feel it." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air. Had I brought something back with me? Had my loneliness summoned a darkness that now threatened us all? "Stay with us," I urged, my voice firm. "We'll figure this out together." But as we turned to leave, the shadows shifted around us, and the forest seemed to come alive. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was watching, something that thrived in our fear. "Run!" Tom shouted, and we took off, the adrenaline propelling us forward. The darkness closed in, and I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Choices had consequences, and now I was faced with the reality of what I had unleashed. In the chaos of our escape, I felt a new determination igniting within me. I would confront this darkness, whatever it was, and protect the community I had once turned my back on. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but I was ready to face it. As the shadows danced around us, Tom and I raced through the forest, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The young woman, whose name I still didn't know, followed closely behind, her breathing ragged with fear. The darkness felt alive, a living entity that thrived on our terror. It was a race against not just time, but against the encroaching dread that threatened to consume us all. In the midst of our flight, memories surged through my mind like a torrent. I remembered my mother's voice, soft yet firm, recounting tales of monsters that lurked in the dark. "Sometimes, Jake," she would say, "the real monsters are the ones we create in our minds." Her words echoed now, a haunting reminder of the fears I had buried deep within me. As we stumbled into a clearing, I took a moment to catch my breath, the moonlight illuminating the scene before us. "We need to regroup," I said, glancing at Tom and the terrified woman. "What exactly did you see?" She hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "It was like a shadow, but it had form. It wasn't just darkness. It watched me, waiting for the right moment to strike." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had felt that presence too, and now it seemed to be targeting us all. "Do you remember when it first appeared?" Tom pressed, his voice steady but urgent. "It was after the storm," the woman replied, her voice trembling. "That night, I heard whispers outside my window, and then I saw it. I thought I was just imagining things, but it kept coming back. My heart raced as I connected the dots. The storm had unleashed something dark, something that thrived in our fears and isolation. It was no coincidence that I had felt drawn to the woods, only to be confronted by my own demons. "We need to confront it," I said, my voice firm, despite the rising tide of anxiety. "Confront what?" she asked, her eyes wide. "You don't even know what it is." "I know fear," I replied, my voice low. "And I know that if we let it control us, it will consume us." As we strategized, I felt the weight of my mother's teachings settle over me once more. Fear had a way of twisting reality, turning shadows into monsters. In confronting this darkness, we would have to face the fears that lay within us, our own personal monsters. With a renewed sense of purpose, we decided to return to the community center. The townspeople needed to be warned, and we needed allies. The pressure of time was palpable. We had to act before fear spread like wildfire, igniting panic in those who had once welcomed me back. As we made our way back, the memories of my time in the wilderness surged again. I thought of my conversations with Emma, how she had always sought to understand the darkness I had tried to escape. "Jake, you can't run from your fears," she'd said. "You have to face them." Her words had resonated then, but I hadn't fully understood their weight until now. When we arrived at the community center, the atmosphere was tense. The laughter had faded, replaced by whispers of uncertainty. Clara rushed to us, her expression a mix of concern and relief. "I was worried about you. What happened out there?" "There's something in the woods," I said, my voice urgent. "We need to prepare everyone. It's feeding off our fear." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her brow furrowing. The young woman saw it after the storm. "It's not just a figment of our imagination. It's real, and it knows our fears." As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in some of the townsfolk's eyes. "You're scaring people," one man said, his voice rising. "There's no monster out there." "Maybe not, but fear itself can be a monster," Tom countered, stepping forward. "We've all felt it, and we need to confront it together." The room fell silent, the weight of our words hanging heavy in the air. I could feel the uncertainty swirling around us, a palpable tension that mirrored my own internal struggle. I had been so eager to reconnect, but now I faced the reality that my return had unearthed something far darker. "Let's gather everyone," Clara said, her voice steady. "We need to hear this from you." As we prepared to address the crowd, I felt the pressure of time bearing down on us. The longer we waited, the more fear would spread, and the more dangerous the situation would become. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of my mother's teachings. Facing our fears was the only way to reclaim our power. When we gathered everyone in the main hall, I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "I know this sounds strange, but we need to talk about what's happening in the woods." The murmurs erupted again, a mix of confusion and skepticism. "You're just trying to scare us," someone shouted. "No, listen," I implored, raising my hands. "Something has come into our lives, and it thrives on our fear. We need to work together to confront it, or it will only grow stronger." The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. But as I continued to speak, I noticed a shift. Clara stepped forward, her voice filled with determination. "Jake is right. We've all felt it. The unease, the whispers. It's not just in our heads." With her support, I felt a surge of courage. "We need to prepare ourselves. We can't let fear control us. Let's gather supplies, form teams, and confront whatever this is together." A young man from the crowd, someone I recognized from my past, stepped forward. "I'll help," he said, his voice steady. "We can't let this take over our lives." As others began to murmur their agreement, I felt a sense of hope rising within me. We were coming together, not just in fear, but in solidarity. The darkness could not thrive if we stood united, Yet, as we organized into teams, I felt the pressure of time weighing on my shoulders. The darkness was lurking, waiting for us to falter. I recalled my mother's stories again, how the monsters often thrived in isolation. The only way to banish them was through unity and understanding. As the night wore on, we divided tasks. Some prepared weapons, while others gathered supplies. Clara took charge of organizing the defenses around the town, her commanding presence instilling confidence in those around her. Tom and I took the lead on reconnaissance, planning to scout the woods where the figure had been seen. In the midst of the preparations, the young woman approached me again. "I'm sorry for dragging you all into this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could handle it." "None of us can handle it alone," I replied, my heart heavy with empathy. "We're stronger together. That's how we'll face whatever this is." She nodded, a flicker of determination igniting in her eyes. It reminded me of my own journey. The isolation I had sought was a double-edged sword. We couldn't hide from our fears. We had to confront them together. As we prepared to head into the woods, I felt a sense of urgency settle over me. The clock was ticking, and the darkness was closing in. But I also felt a newfound strength, a realization that the connections I sought to rebuild were what would ultimately guide us through the storm. We ventured into the woods that night, the moonlight casting long shadows that danced around us. With every step, I felt the weight of my mother's teachings echoing in my mind. The real monsters were the fears we allowed to fester in the dark corners of our minds. And as we moved deeper into the forest, I knew we were no longer just facing a shadow. We were confronting the very essence of fear itself. The night was thick with tension as we ventured deeper into the woods, the trees towering above us like ancient sentinels guarding dark secrets. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow that flickered through the branches, illuminating our path in a way that felt both comforting and foreboding. The air was heavy, charged with an energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my racing heart. It was as if the forest itself was alive, a character in our unfolding story, reflecting the turmoil we carried within. Each step forward felt like a descent into our collective fears, and I could sense the anxiety coursing through the group. Tom walked beside me, his brow furrowed in concentration, while the young woman, whose name I still hadn't learned, trailed behind, glancing nervously at the shadows that danced around us. The tension was palpable, and for a moment I felt the weight of the forest pressing down on us as if it were closing in. "Stay close," I said, my voice steady, though my own fear threatened to creep in. The darkness around us seemed to whisper, taunting us with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. As we moved deeper into the trees, the atmosphere shifted. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and creating a cacophony of whispers that echoed in the stillness. It felt as though the forest was trying to communicate, warning us of the danger that lurked just beyond our sight. I could feel the tension in the air thickening, each rustle sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. Then, without warning, a chilling scream cut through the night, slicing the air like a knife. It was a sound filled with desperation and terror, echoing through the trees. We froze, hearts pounding in our chests. The scream belonged to the young woman who had been trailing us. "Go!" I shouted, adrenaline surging as I sprinted toward the sound, Tom close behind. The forest seemed to shift around us, shadows elongating as if they were reaching for us. The ground beneath our feet felt uneven, and I stumbled, barely catching myself as I pushed forward. When we reached her, she was crouched on the ground, hands pressed against her ears, her face twisted in terror. "It's here!" she gasped, her eyes wide with panic. "I can feel it!" Before I could respond, the shadows around us coalesced, thickening into a dark mist that seemed to pulse and writhe in the moonlight. It was as if the very essence of fear had taken form, swirling around us like a living entity. I could feel it pressing against my chest, a suffocating weight that threatened to pull me under. "Get back!" Tom shouted, pushing the woman behind him. The air felt charged, electric, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I could sense a shift, a turning point in our fight against the darkness, and then, as if summoned by our fear, the figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and indistinct, its features obscured, but the aura of menace radiating from it was palpable. I felt my throat constrict, a primal instinct screaming for me to flee. But I stayed rooted to the spot, driven by an overwhelming need to confront this manifestation of our fears. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling despite my resolve. The figure didn't respond, but the air around us thickened, crackling with an energy that felt almost sentient. I could see Tom's fists clench at his sides, his posture defensive. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, a blur of darkness. My mind raced as I instinctively reached for the flashlight in my pocket, flicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the figure for just a moment. And that's when I saw it. Within the shadows, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face, twisted in an expression of pain and rage. "Emma!" I shouted, my heart dropping as the realization hit. The figure before us was not just a monster. It was a reflection of the people I had left behind, the very essence of my unresolved guilt and fears. "Jake!" she screamed, her voice breaking through the darkness. "Help me!" The sight of her, trapped within this dark entity, ignited a surge of emotions within me, fear, guilt, and a desperate need to save her. "Fight it!" I yelled, willing her to break free from whatever held her captive. "You're stronger than this!" Tom's voice broke through my thoughts. "We need to focus. We can't let it pull us in." He stepped forward, brandishing a makeshift weapon, a branch he had picked up along the way. "Stay together." But as we stood there, the figure seemed to split into multiple shadows, each one flickering with the faces of those I had pushed away. My mother, Tom's lost family, and even the townspeople I had abandoned during my retreat into solitude. They all merged into a swirling mass of despair, feeding off my guilt and fears. "Jake, you have to confront it," Emma's voice pierced, the chaos reminding me of my mother's teachings. "You can't let it control you." With a surge of determination, I stepped forward, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, my voice stronger now. "You don't own me." The shadows recoiled, momentarily faltering at my declaration. I could feel the weight of my fears beginning to lift, the darkness retreating as I embraced the truth of my journey. The forest around us seemed to respond, the wind picking up and swirling the shadows away. But just as I felt a glimmer of hope, a new wave of darkness surged forward, more powerful than before. It wrapped around me, pulling me into its depths. I gasped, fighting against the suffocating grip, but the shadows whispered my insecurities, reminding me of every moment of weakness and doubt I had ever felt. "Jake." Tom's voice broke through the suffocating darkness, his presence anchoring me. "You have to remember who you are." With every ounce of strength I had, I focused on the connections I had forged, the love and support I had once taken for granted. I thought of Emma, of Clara, and of the community that had welcomed me back. The realization washed over me. I was not alone. "Together!" I shouted, channeling my energy into the words. "We face this together." As if fueled by my declaration, the shadows recoiled once more, the figure faltering. I felt a surge of warmth wash over me, and the darkness began to dissolve, revealing the faces of my fears in their true forms. Those I had lost, yes, but also the strength and resilience I had within me. In that moment, the turning point was clear. I wasn't just fighting against a shadow. I was reclaiming my life, my connections, and my courage. The forest seemed to breathe with me, the weight of the darkness lifting as I embraced the light of hope within. The shadows retreated, dissolving into the night like mist under the morning sun. I stood there panting, my chest heaving, as the adrenaline coursed through my veins. The forest felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the oppressive weight of fear had been lifted. But alongside that relief came a wave of exhaustion that threatened to pull me under. "Jake!" Tom's voice broke through the haze. I turned to see him, his face drawn, but fierce, eyes glinting with a mixture of triumph and concern. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my hands trembled, the flashlight slipping slightly as I struggled to regain my composure. My breath came in short bursts, and I felt the cool night air filling my lungs, sharp and invigorating. But beneath that, a deep-seated tremor of anxiety still churned within me, a reminder of the darkness we had just faced. Emma? I glanced back, searching for her in the dim light. She stood a few paces away, visibly shaken, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. The moment our gazes locked, I felt an unspoken connection, an understanding forged in fear and resilience. "I thought I lost you," she whispered, her voice trembling. I took a step toward her, wanting to bridge the gap that had opened between us, wanting to reassure her that we were safe now. But the moment I reached for her, I felt a wave of emotion crash over me. My fingers trembled as I brushed against her arm, and the enormity of what we had just endured hit me like a tidal wave. I pulled her into an embrace, feeling her warmth against me, grounding me in a way nothing else could. "I'm here," I murmured, my voice muffled against her shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere." As I pulled back, I noticed the others gathering around, their expressions a mix of worry and relief. Clara stepped forward, her brow furrowed, eyes scanning the clearing as if still searching for remnants of the darkness we had faced. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the undercurrent of fear. "We confronted it," Tom replied, his voice strong. "But it was more than just a shadow. It was our fears, our regrets." The group fell silent, absorbing his words. I could sense the shift in the atmosphere around us, the way the shadows seemed to retreat further, as if acknowledging our victory. But I also felt a lingering tension in the air, a collective understanding that this was only the beginning. "Did we really defeat it?" the young woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or is it just hiding?" A chill ran down my spine at her words. I thought of the figure that had taken the form of my fears. What if it returned? What if the darkness was merely biding its time? "We need to stay vigilant," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't over. We have to confront our fears together, not just in the woods, but in our lives." With that, a new sense of purpose began to fill the air. The forest no longer felt like a prison. It was a place of healing and growth. We began to share our stories, our fears, each revelation chipping away at the shadows that lingered. As the night wore on, I felt the bonds between us strengthen. Clara spoke of her own struggles with loss, of how she had buried herself in work to escape the pain. Tom shared memories of his family, the agony of their absence still raw but somehow lighter in the presence of friends. And Emma, with tears in her eyes, recounted her battles with self-doubt, the way it had gnawed at her spirit. Each story was a thread woven into the fabric of our shared experience, binding us together in ways I had never imagined. I could feel the warmth of connection replacing the cold grip of isolation I had once sought. But even as we shared, I could sense the lingering shadows of fear just beyond the edge of the clearing. My mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. The battle may have been won, but the war against our fears was ongoing. "Let's head back to the community center," Clara suggested, her voice breaking the spell of introspection. "We need to regroup and plan our next steps." As we made our way back, I walked beside Emma, our shoulders brushing together. The forest, once a source of dread, now felt like a sanctuary. The moon illuminated our path, and I felt a renewed sense of hope blossoming within me. But as we approached the clearing where the community center stood, I noticed something off. The lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced against the walls. My heart sank. Is it just me, or does something feel wrong? I asked, glancing at Tom. He nodded, his expression grim. "We need to be cautious." As we stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted again. The room was filled with the hushed murmurs of our friends, their faces etched with worry. Clara's eyes darted around the room, seeking answers. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. One of the townsfolk stepped forward, his face pale. There's been another sighting. People have seen it near their homes. A collective gasp rippled through the room, and I felt the fear return in full force. "We thought we dealt with it," I exclaimed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "How can it still be out there?" "It's feeding on our fear," Tom said, his voice steady. "We need to confront it, but we can't do it alone. We need everyone's strength." The room fell silent as we all absorbed his words. I could see the fear in their eyes, the doubt creeping in. I felt a sense of urgency rise within me. We can't let it win. We can't let it take our community. Suddenly, a voice piped up from the back. It was the young woman who had joined us in the woods. "What if we face it together? What if we confront our fears as a community?" Her words hung in the air, igniting a spark of determination in the room. I could see the flicker of hope in Clara's eyes, the way Tom's posture shifted, filled with resolve. "Yes," I said, stepping forward. "We need to organize, to stand together. We can't allow fear to dictate our lives any longer." As we began to strategize, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. I was no longer just a solitary figure lost in the woods. I was part of something greater. The community was rising, united in purpose, ready to face the darkness together. The night had transformed us, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the people around me. We were no longer defined by our fears, but by our strength and resilience. Together, we would confront whatever shadows lay ahead. The dawn broke with a soft light filtering through the trees, a gentle reminder that the night's battles had ended, but the journey was far from over. As I stepped out of the community center, the crisp morning air filled my lungs, invigorating me. I felt the weight of uncertainty still lingering, but it was accompanied by a new sense of purpose. We had gathered the community the night before, united in our resolve to confront the darkness that had seeped into our lives. Now, as the sun rose, I realized that this was more than just a fight against a shadow. It was a fight for our lives, our connections, and our very essence as a community. "Jake," Clara's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She approached, her expression a mix of determination and anxiety. "We need to plan our next steps. We've got to fortify our homes and create a system for reporting sightings." I nodded, feeling the urgency in her words. "Absolutely. We should also organize a patrol. If fear is what fuels this thing, we need to take away its power." As we strategized, I felt the stirrings of leadership within me, a role I had avoided for so long. I remembered the nights alone in the woods, the way I had shunned connection, thinking isolation would bring me peace. Now I understood the true strength lay in unity. The day unfolded with purpose. We divided into groups, assigning tasks for fortifying homes and creating a communication system. I led a team to gather supplies, moving through the town with a renewed energy. The interactions with my neighbors felt different now. There was a camaraderie that hadn't existed before. We were no longer just individuals living parallel lives. We were a community intertwined by our shared experiences. With each conversation, I felt my confidence grow. I was no longer the quiet observer. I was an active participant, driven by the desire to protect those around me. The fear that had once gripped me began to dissipate, replaced by a determination that felt almost foreign, yet exhilarating. Later in the afternoon, as we gathered to review our progress, I noticed the young woman who had first screamed in the woods. "I want to help," she said, stepping forward, her voice steady. "I've been practicing self-defense. I can teach others." Her willingness to confront her fears resonated deeply with me. It reminded me that growth often emerged from the ashes of fear. "That's a great idea," I said, feeling a swell of pride in her courage. "We should all learn how to defend ourselves, both physically and emotionally." As I watched the group rally around her, I felt a sense of hope blossom within me. Each member of our community was stepping into their power, confronting the shadows that had plagued us for too long. But even as we fortified our defenses, I knew we had to face the deeper issues at play. The darkness we battled was not just a physical entity. It was a manifestation of our fears, our regrets, and the isolation we had allowed to fester. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I gathered everyone in the community center for a discussion. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. "We've made significant progress," I began, glancing around at the faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. "But we need to address our fears head-on." "What do you mean?" Tom asked, leaning forward, his expression serious. "I mean, we can't just focus on the physical defenses. We need to talk about what we're feeling, what we're afraid of. Ignoring it won't make it go away." The room fell silent, and I could see the apprehension in their eyes. They had come together to fight against an external threat, but I sensed that many were still grappling with their inner demons. I was too. "I know what it's like to feel isolated," I continued, my voice steady. "I ran from my fears, thinking I could hide from them. But in doing so, I only allowed them to grow stronger." Clara nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding. "We need to remember that we are not alone in this. Sharing our fears can be empowering." Encouraged by her support, I urged others to share. One by one, stories emerged, tales of loss, regret, and the fear of failure. Each confession felt like a weight lifted, the shadows retreating further into the corners of the room. I realized that vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness, and it connected us in ways I had never anticipated. As the night wore on, I felt a transformation within myself. I was no longer just a survivor of my past. I was becoming a leader in the present. The act of sharing had woven a tapestry of support that fortified us against the darkness. I understood now that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward despite it. The following days were filled with action and reflection. We continued to fortify our homes and practiced self-defense techniques led by the young woman, whose name I learned was Mia. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I admired her resilience. Each time I saw her instruct others, I felt a renewed sense of purpose within myself. But challenges arose. One afternoon, while on patrol with Tom, we encountered a group of townsfolk who had seen something lurking near their homes. Their fear was palpable, and I could see it tightening around them like a noose. "Jake, what if it comes for us?" one man asked, his voice shaky. "We face it together," I replied, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on my shoulders. "We've already proven that we're stronger than our fears. It thrives on our doubt, but we won't let it take us." In that moment, I felt the transformation within me solidify. I was no longer just a participant. I was a leader, a beacon of hope for those around me. The fear that had once consumed me now fueled my determination to protect our community. As the weeks passed, we built a bond that was unbreakable. Each member of the community began to find their strength, facing their fears with newfound courage. I watched as people who had once felt powerless began to blossom, taking on roles that reflected their gifts. Mia took charge of the self-defense classes, her confidence inspiring others. Clara organized community discussions that allowed us to explore our emotions, fostering a safe space for vulnerability. And Tom became a steadfast protector, leading patrols with an unwavering sense of duty. Through it all, I realized that growth was not a linear process. There were moments of doubt and fear, but each time I felt the shadows creeping back, I was met with the light of my community. We had forged a bond that transcended individual struggles, and in doing so, we had created a shield against the darkness. One evening, as I stood outside the community center, I looked up at the stars twinkling against the deep blue sky. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a quiet understanding that I was no longer defined by my fears. Instead, I was defined by my actions, by the connections I had forged, and by the courage to face whatever lay ahead. I understood now that the journey of overcoming was ongoing. There would always be new challenges, new shadows to confront. But As long as I had this community beside me, I knew we could face anything together. The air was thick with anticipation as we gathered in the community center, the soft hum of nervous chatter weaving through the room. We had spent weeks preparing for this moment, training together, sharing our fears, and forging bonds that felt unbreakable. Yet, as I glanced around at the faces of my friends and neighbors, I sensed an undercurrent of anxiety that mirrored my own. "Tonight is the night," I said, trying to infuse my voice with confidence. "We're going to confront the darkness once and for all." Clara stepped forward, her expression serious. "We fortified our homes, organized patrols, and trained in self-defense, but we need to stay united. If we let fear creep back in, we'll lose our strength." Nods of agreement rippled through the crowd, but I could see the tension in their eyes. It was one thing to prepare, it was another to face the unknown that awaited us in the woods. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I felt a knot of apprehension tighten in my stomach. We had trained hard, but the reality of what we were about to face loomed large. The darkness had not just been a physical entity, it had been a reflection of our deepest fears. "Let's split into teams," I suggested, trying to maintain focus. "Mia, you'll lead one group into the woods. Tom and I will take another route. The goal is to flush it out and keep communication open." The room buzzed with energy as we divided into teams, the sense of purpose uniting us. I felt a surge of determination as we prepared to step into the unknown. We were no longer individuals battling our demons. We were a collective force, ready to face the shadows together. As we moved toward the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The trees loomed above us, their branches swaying gently in the wind, almost as if they were whispering secrets. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the forest floor. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs, grounding me. "Stay close," I instructed, my voice steady. "Remember what we've practiced." We ventured deeper into the woods, the sounds of the night enveloping us. The rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional snap of twigs beneath our feet created a symphony of nature that felt both comforting and foreboding. As we approached the clearing where we had confronted the darkness before, a sense of unease settled over me. I could feel the tension rising, a palpable energy that seemed to pulse in the air. My heart raced, but I pushed the fear aside. We were ready. Then, out of nowhere, a howl echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. It was a sound filled with primal rage, a warning that we were not alone. "Did you hear that?" Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, adrenaline surging. "We need to keep moving." The howl reverberated again, closer this time, and I could feel the fear gripping my team, but I knew we couldn't let it control us. "Stay focused," I urged. "We're in this together." As we reached the clearing, the moonlight illuminated the ground, revealing footprints, large, deep imprints that sent a wave of dread coursing through me. "This way," I said, motioning, for the group to follow me deeper into the woods. But as we moved further, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The whispers of the forest grew louder, and the shadows around us seemed to thicken. My thoughts raced, fueled by a mixture of anxiety and determination. And then it hit me, the realization that would change everything. The true enemy was not the darkness itself, but the fear within us that had given it power. It thrived on our doubts, our insecurities, and our isolation. "Everyone, listen," I shouted, forcing my voice to rise above the cacophony of whispers. "This darkness feeds on our fear. We need to confront it head-on, not just outside, but within ourselves." The group paused, uncertainty flickering across their faces. "What do you mean?" Mia asked, eyebrows knitted in confusion. "I mean that we have to acknowledge our fears and embrace them," I explained, urgency in my voice. "We can't let it control us anymore. We need to stand tall and reclaim our power." As I spoke, I felt the energy shift. The shadows around us began to recede, revealing glimpses of the forest that had once felt so threatening. I could see the determination in my friend's eyes, the flicker of hope igniting within them. "Let's do this," Tom shouted, stepping forward. "Together!" With renewed resolve, we formed a circle, each person holding hands, creating an unbreakable bond. I could feel the warmth of their grips, the shared heartbeat of our collective courage as we stood. Together, the darkness surged forward, a swirling mass of fear and uncertainty. But this time, it felt different. Instead of succumbing to the panic, we held our ground, channeling our strength into a unified front. "Face it!" I yelled, my voice ringing through the clearing. "We are stronger than you!" The shadows hesitated, swirling around us as if testing our resolve. I could feel the weight of my fears, the regret, the guilt, the isolation, but instead of retreating, I faced them head on. "I am not afraid," I shouted, the words echoing through the night. One by one, I could see my friends doing the same. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady as she declared, "I will not let you take my happiness." Mia joined in, her eyes fierce. "I will not let you define me." Each declaration added fuel to our collective fire, pushing the darkness back further. The shadows writhed, furious at our defiance, but we stood our ground, our unity creating a barrier that it could not breach. And then, in a moment of clarity, I realized the truth behind the darkness. It was not an external force. It was a reflection of our own fears. By confronting them together, we were dismantling its power piece by piece. Suddenly, the shadows lunged forward, but this time, we were ready. We met the darkness with our voices, our courage rising in a chorus of defiance. "You have no power over us," I shouted, and the others echoed my words, each voice stronger than the last. As the darkness began to dissipate, I saw a figure emerge from the depths, a familiar face, twisted in anguish. It was my mother. "Jake," she called, her voice filled with pain. "Help me!" My heart raced as I recognized the manifestation of my deepest guilt. "Mom," I yelled, stepping forward, "you're not lost. I'm here." But as I reached out, I felt the shadows surge around me, threatening to pull me back into despair. "No," I shouted, shaking my head. "You are not my fear. You are my strength." With that declaration, the shadows began to unravel, the figure of my mother flickering like a candle in the wind. "You've grown, my son," she whispered, her voice fading into the night. "You have the power to overcome." And just like that, the darkness shattered, the remnants retreating into the forest, leaving behind a serene stillness. We stood in silence, the reality of what had just happened settling over us. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight of fear lifting as the moon shone brightly above. Did we do it?" Tom asked, disbelief mingling with relief. I nodded, feeling a sense of triumph and clarity wash over me. We faced our fears together, and in doing so, we reclaimed our power. As we turned to leave the clearing, I felt a profound sense of connection with my friends. We had not only confronted the darkness, we had transformed it into something powerful. The clearing was eerily quiet as we stood together, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The shadows had receded, but I could feel the tension in the air, as if the darkness was merely waiting for its moment to strike again. I glanced at my friends, their faces a mix of determination and fear, and I knew we had come too far to turn back now. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled, and a low growl echoed through the trees, reverberating off the trunks like a warning. The darkness coalesced once more, swirling ominously before us, but this time it felt different, more volatile, more desperate. "Stay together," I shouted, my voice rising above the growl. "We can't let it divide us." The shadows lunged forward, tendrils reaching for us, but instead of retreating, I took a step forward. "You don't own us," I yelled, channeling every ounce of courage I had. "We are not afraid." As the tendrils neared, I could see faces within the darkness, twisted, anguished, echoing my own fears. But this time, I recognized them not as enemies, but as remnants of my past, the burdens I had carried for far too long. They were the manifestations of my guilt, my regrets, and the isolation I had allowed to fester. "Face it," I implored, my voice steady. "We are stronger than you." Tom stepped beside me, his fists clenched, ready to fight. "Together," he echoed, rallying the others. We formed a circle, a united front against the encroaching darkness. As the tendrils lashed out, we held our ground. The air crackled with energy, the forest alive with the tension of our battle. Each time a shadow reached for us, we pushed back with our voices, our resolve intertwining like a rope that could not be severed. "Tell it what you fear," Clara shouted, her voice slicing through the chaos. "We won't let it control us anymore." Each person began to voice their fears: fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of never being enough. With every declaration, the shadows pulsed and writhed, as if recoiling from our words. I felt the weight of my own fears lift with each statement, empowering not just me, but everyone around me. Then, in the midst of the chaos, I saw a new figure emerge from the darkness, an embodiment of my deepest regret. It was my father, his face twisted in pain. "You abandoned us, Jake," he said, his voice echoing in a haunting melody. "You let us down." I felt the sting of guilt wash over me, but this time I didn't flinch. "I know," I shouted back, my heart racing, "but I'm not that person anymore. I've learned, I've grown. I can't change the past, but I can forge a new path." With that declaration, the shadows surged, but I could feel them weakening. The tendrils began to dissolve, retreating at the edges of our circle. The more we faced our fears, the more we dismantled the darkness that had held us captive. "Now," I shouted, "together we reclaim our power." In a unified burst of energy, we all raised our hands, creating a barrier of light that pushed back against the shadows. The darkness writhed, shrieking in protest, but we held firm. With every ounce of strength, we rejected the fear that had plagued us for so long, and then, in a blinding flash, the darkness exploded outward, dissipating into the night like smoke in the wind. The clearing fell silent, the air still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I stood there, panting, heart racing, my friends beside me, their faces illuminated by the moonlight. The fear that had once consumed me was gone, replaced by a profound understanding of what we had accomplished together. But as the dust settled, I felt a stirring within me, a lingering question that whispered in the back of my mind. Had we truly vanquished the darkness, or had we merely pushed it away for now? The aftermath of our confrontation with the darkness was palpable. The forest felt lighter, the air clearer, and a sense of peace settled over the community. We had faced our fears and emerged stronger, but the journey was far from over. In the days that followed, we began to rebuild not just our homes, but our lives. The community center buzzed with activity as we organized workshops, shared our experiences, and supported one another in ways we had never thought possible. Each person began to embrace their individuality while also recognizing the strength in our unity. Mia's self-defense classes became a cornerstone of our recovery, empowering others to reclaim their agency. Clara continued to lead discussions, providing a safe space for vulnerability and sharing. Tom took on the role of a protector, organizing patrols that kept our community safe, instilling a sense of security we had longed for. As we rebuilt, I found myself transformed. No longer the isolated figure I had once been, I became a leader, a beacon of hope for those around me. I understood the importance of connection, of facing fears not just in solitude, but alongside others. The darkness may have retreated, but I knew it could return if we allowed fear to creep back in. One evening, as I stood beneath the stars, I reflected on our journey. I had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to confront it, to stand tall despite it. The scars of my past were still there, but they no longer defined me. As the days turned into weeks, I could feel a shift in the community. We were no longer just neighbors, we were family. The bonds we had forged through struggle and triumph were unbreakable. But even amidst the progress, a lingering thought echoed in my mind. What if the darkness returned? Would we be ready? We had prepared ourselves for the fight, but the true test lay in our ability to remain vigilant, to continue facing our fears even when they lay dormant. I knew that our journey was ongoing, a continuous cycle of growth and confrontation. As we gathered one last time in the community center, I looked at the faces of my friends, each one a testament to our shared struggle. We've overcome so much together, I said, my voice filled with emotion. Let's promise to continue supporting one another, to remain united against whatever comes our way. The room erupted in applause, a powerful affirmation of our commitment to one another. We were ready for whatever the future held. Months later, the town thrived under the glow of newfound hope. We had transformed the community center into a hub of activity, fostering creativity and resilience. As I walked through the streets, I saw familiar faces, each one a reminder of our journey. But every so often, I felt a chill in the air, a whisper of uncertainty that made me wonder if we had truly banished the shadows. Join us on this journey of resilience and courage. Share your own stories of overcoming fear and connecting with others. Your voice matters, and together we can inspire change. Click to explore the next story or video that resonates with your experiences, and let's continue this conversation.